Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special Travelcast of the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and Criminally Good with Sherrie and Jen. Guys, thanks for coming by, Sherrie and Jen. Who's our guest today?
Well, our guest is Jeff Callaway and Ethan Almighty. And I know you look at Ethan Almighty and you're like, what? That's a name, but it is a name and is very well deserved. So Jeff is a animal welfare advocate, and we'll talk about that and how he got into all that. But first, I just want to say welcome, Jeff. And I think Ethan is sleeping right now, so we'll just bring him on maybe later on.
Thank you very much for having us. And he's sleeping, as I was mentioning a few minutes ago. We had a long day. He's a little bit tired, but he may pop up here at any time.
Yeah, let's get back. You were a volunteer for an animal shelter, rescue shelter, and somebody had left this mastiff dog, supposed to weigh in his 90s, 90 pounds, in the 90 pounds, and he was 38 pounds. So, how did you find out about him, and what was that connection?
I was actually working at the shelter at the time, and I was the facility director at this shelter. And it was during COVID, and so we were closed to the public. And so we had signs on the door. If you needed something, call this number. And so thankfully, there was a car that was dropping off some donations to the shelter. And as they were pulling out, it was a husband and wife and their young son. And he sees this dog in the parking lot. And it's January 29th. It's really cold outside. And he stopped and alerted his mom. They jumped out and immediately ran to the door, called the phone number. They scooped him up, brought him inside. And at that point, they called me to say, can you check the cameras? There was a dead dog dropped off in the parking lot. And, can we find the camera or the car that maybe had dropped him off? Over the course of, the first probably year or so, I had a couple people come to me independent of one another to tell me they knew where he came from. He was sold as a Presa Canario puppy. That's like a Spanish Mastiff type breed. He was traded for drugs, and then that person began abusing him and intentionally starving him. And there was a lady that knew the condition he was in and hadn't seen him for 3 or 4 weeks, so she wanted to drive by. And if you imagine probably in your mind the worst mobile home park you can think of, this is worse than that. And she drives by and she sees him, scrunched up in this little cage and thinks that he's dead also. And he moves a little bit. And so she jumps up and she takes him from the kennel and takes him home. He's covered in urine, feces, and dirt. And she douses him in Dawn dishwashing liquid and immediately believes this dog is going to die any moment in my house. What am I going to do with it? And so she was the person that came to the shelter and dropped him off in the parking lot. And, quite frankly, later found out that the reason she never wanted her name to come out was because she was scared to death of that guy. She was afraid for her safety if he knew who it was. But she saved his life. And that was the first, random act of kindness that went Ethan's way. He just needed, he wanted to live. He had this desire to live. He just needed someone to give him a chance. And then thankfully, Tatum, the young boy that we do know, saw him in the parking lot and alerted his parents. And they rushed him in, and he was taken to a good spot where people had the expertise and the knowledge of what to do and to take care of him. And about 10 minutes after that was my rumor mill around the shelter was he was still alive. And I popped my head in, and he was up on a table, and they were trying to clean him off. And they had to use like the smallest kitten needle you could possible to get into his veins because they were so dehydrated. And there was something about seeing him up on the table that I just knew he was my dog. And they would say over the first few days they would say, Jeff, he's not going to make it. There's a good chance he's not going to live. And I said that's okay. He's my dog, and he's going to know that somebody cares about him before he passes away.
I gotta know, where does he get the name? How does he get such an amazing name?
So as they were working on him that day, as in that field, in that veterinary medicine field, they have to deal with so many horrible stories and horrible things. And you don't just ever want to look at a cat or a dog and just think that's a cat or a dog. They wanted to give him a name. And so that's what they wanted to start calling him something. And so one of the vet techs, Dakota, looked up on his phone, Googled a few things, and Ethan means strong, firm, good-willed in Hebrew. And so they gave him the name Ethan. And then a little bit later, when I started his social media, I added the Almighty on there to give him Ethan Almighty. Yeah.
So we can find Ethan Almighty along with Jeff, who does the typing for the social media. But where do we find you as far as reaching out to Ethan? What's he on?
Social media, Facebook and Instagram, he is Ethan Almighty. And then anyone can go to ethanalmighty.com, and we have a lot of good information there also.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, because I want to talk about the law here in the minute that they got passed.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that law. Yeah. So when, from the time they found him, and Sherrie had mentioned 38 pounds, when is he at a point where you can take him to your home, where you can start doing things with him and start getting to learn what his personality is going to be?
But he was he went home with a vet tech the first day on an IV, and he started seizing in the middle of the night. And another beautiful person, kindness. She's got several young kids, got several animals of her own. She could have easily said, I'll deal with this in the morning. We'll wait for this. He'll be okay. We'll let it pass. She put him right in the car, drove him straight to the hospital, stopping at the stop signs and stoplights, putting her hand on him in the back seat, making sure he was still breathing. And he ended up at the hospital for 4 to 5 days, where they started to work with him with towels to retrain him how to walk. This was an 8 or 9 month old Mastiff dog who his body had used every ounce of muscle and energy just to stay alive. And so he comes back to the shelter about 4 to 5 days later, at that point, not walking. And so the vet and one of the vet techs came in that night to take care of him, clean him up. And that was the first night he stood up on his own and started walking. They've got some really cute video of the very first time he stood up and started walking. And so I came in the next day. I hear, my first thing is I'm going to pop in there to see how he's doing. And they said, he stood up and he started walking around last night. And they were behind a little gate. They were sitting in there with him. And I came over to the gate, and he came over and gave me a kiss and licked me on the face. And they said, that's the first time he's shown any affection to anybody. Which sort of upset them, because they're like, hey, dude, we saved your life. You can't give us, show us a little love back. And so I right then and there, I said, what can I do? And they said, if you would like to come in, if you want to volunteer and come in at nighttime to take care of him, we'll show you what to do. And so for about the next 15 to 16 days, I would come in for 2.5 hours at night, clean him up. He had pressure sores on his legs, which are like bed sores, down to his bone, where he was in a kennel, he couldn't move. And so we would rewrap those. I would clean him up. I would feed him. I would take him for a walk outside. And his physical injuries were very, very obvious. But his mind, you could tell, was hurting also. We would go for a walk at nighttime, and it was just kind of wandering. There was no purpose. He wasn't sure what was going on. So when we would come back in, I would play little games with him. Like I would hide treats, or we would play fetch or something. I was just trying my best to get his mind going. And so some bad weather was coming in about 2.5 weeks later. And the vet said, we weren't even sure the shelter was going to be open. And she said, I think he would be okay if he just stayed at your house. And so he came to my house that night, and he's been there ever since. I would, for the first several years, I would get up in the morning, take him with me to work, and drop him off at the vet area, and I would go and do my work. And at the end of the day, I'd come and pick him up and bring him back. But really, at the time, when we adopted him, we had 3 Great Danes and 2 little pit mixes. That first weekend that he stayed at our house, that whole weekend, was the first time that he barked, that we heard him bark. It was the first time we'd seen him play with the other animals, with the toys. And he became a dog again. And it was almost like a light switch went on with his mind. You could tell that there was something different there, and he had purpose to different things.
That's a
Well,
wonderful story.
it is. And he had a 10% chance of living when he was found. And, you know, as you're talking, I think about all the other animals that weren't found, that aren't found, that don't have a Jeff Callaway there. And so because of that, you guys pushed forward for Ethan's Law. Tell us how that came about and what Ethan's Law is all about.
Well, when we figured out more about his story, after we adopted him, he started having seizures. They were a little hard to recognize because they weren't convulsive seizures; they were like catatonic seizures. So he might just be laying there, and he just wasn't there, and his body would heat up 3 to 4 minutes. His body would heat up almost; it was hard to touch. So we got him a brain scan and found some lesions in his brain that were specifically caused from the dehydration and the starvation. But they also found other damage that had been from blunt force trauma where he'd been hit in the head. And so then his story began to come together for us. And then you look back at those pictures that are horrifying to look at. And you start looking into what's going on in Kentucky. And had they found the person that had done that, there were basically no charges they could charge him with. It would be a misdemeanor at most. And that just wasn't acceptable. And when I started his social media, just for the simple fact to show everyone that had an outpouring of prayers and love and support and financial donations and toys, and kind words for Ethan. I just wanted to start their social media just so they could continue to follow him and see how he was doing. And it sort of turned into, it just started getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And he won this contest through Bush Beer and by this huge margin. And I thought, okay, we can do something with this, more with this story to help other animals. How do we do that? And as someone who knew nothing about trying to get a law passed, I got in touch with a lady who had, for a couple of years, had written something similar to this. And, you know, we just said, this story needs, you can give people all the statistics that you want, and they're out there, and there is truth behind them, right? 80% of people that commit a violent crime against a human started with an animal. I mean, that stuff is out there. And sometimes you need a face and a story to really hit home with people and really touch their heart. And so the first couple, you know, we did everything. The first year, it was really trying to organize people to call and email their representatives to pass this. And while there were thousands of those coming in, it didn't get anywhere the first couple of years. The third year, it passed the House, didn't pass the Senate. And so we spent a whole summer, and all along here, learning different things about it. We spent the whole summer meeting with senators to talk to them about, would you vote for this if it comes up? What would you change? Is there anything that you want to see different? And so the fourth year came around, and we went, and after the third year, what we really heard was, can you find a different person to introduce it? And we were like, yeah, absolutely. Easiest thing to do. So we found someone else, animal lover, a local representative, actually. And so Representative Susan Tyler Witten. And so we went to House Judiciary and testified. We went to Senate Judiciary and testified. And in 2024, it passed in Kentucky, Ethan's Law, and it makes the intentional torture of a cat or a dog a first offense felony in Kentucky.
That's outstanding. Thank you for doing that.
It was a journey. You know, you get into that and you think, this is going to be, how does this work? And you go into it thinking this is common sense, right? Like, who wants to hurt animals? Like, who? And there's so many struggles with just getting it passed. There's so many special interest groups that you need, even if they're not going to support it, you need them to not oppose it. In Kentucky, probably like in a lot of places, your animals are considered your property. And so while people weren't for animal abuse, they would come out and tell you, I don't want anyone telling me what I can do with my property. And so, you know, the best example I would give them is I'll go along with you and I'll agree with you as long as you can distinguish between something like your car and your dog. You can go out into the driveway and beat the crap out of your car with a baseball bat, and it's not a crime. But if you do it to an animal, then it should be, and you should be punished. And one of the other things was vote for it because you like animals. But if you don't even vote for animal things, it will make your community safer. You're going to put some of these people that are either going to abuse other animals or other vulnerable people, kids, a spouse, a partner, an elderly person, put them in jail so they're not out there hurting other people.
That's 100%. I worked enough arson, enough other type of criminal activity for 32 years, and yeah, hurting animals is one of those things that a lot of violent people start out with younger. And I mean, I know they talk about it with serial killers, serial rapists, but it's other criminal activity too. It's long-term domestic abusers. Yeah, they start out young, hurting animals, hurting smaller children. And it progresses. Um, it's not a one-time act. It's not a one-off. It's continual. So, getting that law passed, it's important because no one can take action until you have something like that. And you know what? Shame on the people that took 4 years to decide that. Hey, yeah, let's get this passed.
Well, we were extremely excited about that. And again, as someone that learned through the process, who didn't understand any of that, you get this law passed and you think to yourself, this is great. Now these people are going to be prosecuted, and you quickly figure out that's not the case. And so I wanted to help cats and dogs all over. We were blessed after the fact, after the law passed, that they wanted to call it Ethan's Law. But there was no way in hell you're going to put my dog's name on something and you weren't going to do something about it. So I started asking around, why wasn't this person? I would call around to different counties, and in Kentucky, for whatever reason, we had this extreme amount of counties, 120 counties in Kentucky. So I started calling around to county attorneys and Commonwealth attorneys about why wasn't this person prosecuted or this person. And the answer I got back was, oh, we didn't know about that. Because there's not something that just goes out to your prosecutors in the state of the new laws that were passed during the past session. They're required to find that stuff out on their own. There's no email, there's no newsletter. And so I said, okay, that's fine. We'll take that excuse off the table. So we set up a table at the county attorneys conference and the Commonwealth attorneys conference and just handed out copies of the law. Even if they said, no, I already know about it. I said, well, no, here you go. Here's a clean, fresh copy. Take it back, look over it, study it. And then from that point realized we needed to start tracking and following these cases around the state. And so Ethan has probably been in 50, 60 courtrooms. And we go around, and when there's a case that comes up, and we encourage people to reach out and tell us about what they hear about in their part of the state, I'll reach out to the county attorney or Commonwealth attorney and just say, hey, here's who we are. Here's what we like to do. We follow these cases. We'll probably be coming to your courtroom. Is there anything we can help with? We saw something like this in another part of the state. Here's what they did that was really good. Here's something they could have improved on. And so we track all that. We'll drive sometimes 3.5 hours for a 2-minute arraignment because it's important to have his face in the courtroom. Because sometimes when you just want people to just do their job, sometimes it takes them knowing that there's outside eyes watching before they actually do really what they're supposed to do. And I just tell people, the law is there. The legislators put the law there. They are telling you they want you to prosecute this. Just do what the law says. And in some cases, it comes out good. We probably walk away more frustrated than not. But we just keep pushing forward, and we got some other things that we hope, that Kentucky will consider passing, in the near future, in the next couple of sessions. So,
well,
I wish you the best.
I hope other states pick up on that too. Like, it's in Kentucky. Has there been other states that have adopted it?
I think there are some other states that have something similar to this. Sometimes the language is a little bit different, and so it's hard to You got to really dive deep in to compare things. Like in Kentucky, it's a Class D felony. In some other states, it might be a level 4 or level 6 or something. But it's important to, as a good step to get out there. Kentucky's always ranked towards the bottom of animal welfare, and so this was one of those things that is a good step. And one of the things that I think was a byproduct that we weren't really sure we would see. We want the people that are prosecuted with this felony to be charged properly under the felony. But what was happening in the past, those people were being charged with a misdemeanor, and it was either being dropped or lowered to like an ordinance, a local ordinance of some kind. My guess is if you start looking at the numbers, you probably see more people since Ethan's law as a felony is passed. More people have been charged and convicted with the second-degree misdemeanor animal cruelty, because the things that shouldn't have gotten dropped as a felony got dropped to a misdemeanor instead of dropped to nothing. And so in Kentucky, one of the biggest things that I thought really starting into this, something that would really benefit would to have an animal abuse database or an animal abuse registry. And so there's a couple really good ones out there. Florida has a good one. Tennessee has a decent one. And I think that is a really good step forward after being, hands on the ground in the courtrooms. What I am seeing is so many people are getting diversion or probation. And in Kentucky, there's a list of like serious crimes or violent crimes that aren't eligible for pretrial diversion or felony diversion or probation. And what I would like to see in Kentucky is for them to put this felony crime on that list. And so when you've killed, like we saw in Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky, a couple of weeks ago, when you have just walked away from 2 dogs in your house and you have starved and killed 2 dogs, instead of getting probation, you'll have to serve time because it won't be eligible for probation anymore. And that's one of the things I'd like to see us try to put a bill out there and see, how people feel about that.
And may I ask you if you talk to anybody on the federal level as to things, and I know it's a little different only because you have to show crossing the state lines, interstate nexus on a lot of it, such as dog fighting, that sort of thing. But I was just wondering if you had any input or any contact on the federal end of being able to fight for animal welfare.
We've gone to Capitol Hill as guests with American Humane a couple times and met with some federal legislators, some House of Representatives on the federal level, but it was really in support of some things that American Humane was wanting to get done. And they don't lobby on the state level. It's just sort of a federal thing. And so we haven't really talked to them about animal abuse in that sense as a federal crime. And we don't see too many things. So in Kentucky, there is a felony for dog fighting, and finally it took way too long, but bestiality is a felony, and Ethan's law is a felony. And so we haven't really talked to anyone on a federal level about that because there's those specific things that have popped up. We've run into a case that I can think of out of McCracken County where a gentleman there, I won't even say gentleman, there's a guy there that since 2011, 2012 had over 200 counts of animal cruelty. They'd gone onto his property at one time and removed over 100 dogs, and then went back a few years and removed over 50 dogs. And finally, the third or fourth time, it was after 2024, after Ethan's law was passed, and finally he was charged with 19 felonies. In Kentucky, you can stack 4 felonies on top of one another. So he ended up getting, as a result in sentencing, he got 10 years for animal abuse and 5 years for burying his dad in the backyard. When they went looking for dogs, they were digging up where he had buried dogs, and they found his dead father in his backyard also. So, and that particular guy had some ties to a couple rescues up around New York and New Jersey, and another rescue over in South Carolina. So there's actually, and I'm not sure if it's the FBI or some federal prosecutors that are still investigating him because of transporting people that were under the guise of rescues, were sending him animals that they deemed were unadoptable to this property in Kentucky, and those animals were just dying there.
Well, let's talk really good, but something exciting is
Yeah.
going on. Started production April, right? Ethan Almighty, a heartfelt story of survival and change. Tell us, how did that come about? Ethan is the star, I'm thinking, of this show, right?
Well, that's the movie is about Ethan, but they have trained like dog actors that come and work on those kind of things. And in this case, there was a little dog named Bodie that played Ethan, and we went to the set every day. And this little dog Bodie was fantastic. Matter of fact, I would look at them and I was like, "Who trained your dog? Can you come and train my dog?" Like was really good. So it was about probably a year and a half, maybe even before the law was passed. There was someone. Her name is Tawny McClure. She is a director, actress, screenwriter, producer out in Los Angeles. And there was a mutual acquaintance by, I think, Facebook of someone in Kentucky. And she reached out to me and said, "Hey, here's who I am. Here's what I do. Have you ever thought about making Ethan's story a movie?" And I thought, no, like that, I've never thought about that, but it sounds really cool. I mean, there's so many weird coincidences in the Ethan story that even before she called, I would tell people if this was a movie, people wouldn't believe it because of all these interesting things that just sort of popped up. So even before then, um, she would, I would send her some things and she would write some of the screenplay, and I'd send her some more and she'd write some more of the screenplay. And eventually she sent me about half of it. She said, "I normally don't ever do this, but I want to make sure that everything is good." And it's based on a true story. It's not a documentary, but it's based on a true story and real events, and is really so many real things she was able to incorporate into this movie. And it's really fascinating. I mean, she has done a remarkable job. And so for 2 years or a year and a half or so, we were going through this process, and she knows all about the fundraising and getting investors and all that. And then, the day that Ethan's Law passed, we were in the Senate, sitting up watching the Senate. We'd driven back and forth so many times. And there were a lot of big things going on in Kentucky at the time: sports gambling, some LGBTQ stuff. And so that particular day, we'd been there 5 or 6 hours, and I'd taken Ethan out, I don't know, 3 or 4 times to go to the bathroom when we come back. And it passes. There was actually a senator that wanted to add a couple floor amendments to it. And had they been added, it probably wouldn't have passed, but they got shot down. She even made a comment at the time. She looked up at us in the gallery and said they even brought their puppy prop with them to try to get this passed today. And I thought, come on, like the time and effort that we've invested in this, and you're calling him a puppy prop. So it passes. I run outside and I'm calling a few people, and she's one of the first people I called, and we're super excited. And I tell her that, and she's like, "Stop, stop, stop. I'm going to write that down. I want to put that in the movie." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "I'll change the person's name." And I said, "No, no, no, no. You leave that person's name the same."
Yeah, it's on the record. So that, yeah.
Long story short, I think she's actually going to be listed in the credits as Angry Senate Woman. But we finish writing. She gets some investments, and we get this ArcLight company to buy in, and we're ready to go. And I've been hearing about this for a couple of years. And the first day of filming is at the Capitol in Kentucky. They were not kind enough to turn the Capitol over to the film crew for 3 days. And I showed up, and I guess it just had never hit me. And I was like, this is a whole ass movie. Like this is happening. There are and Sean Patrick Flannery is a gentleman that plays me, and Bodie plays Ethan, and Kelly Sullivan plays Representative Susan Tyler Whitten. Kelsey Grammer plays the governor of Kentucky.
Wow.
Selma Blair is in the movie. I mean, and as I talked to each one of them, everybody had a reason for being in the movie. Everybody had, a dog story, or they'd heard of Ethan. And there was this buy-in from the very beginning of people that were there. Yes, they were getting paid as actors and actresses, but they were there because they wanted to be part of this particular thing. And so that meant a whole lot to us.
Well, here
Congratulations on
is,
that.
I don't know if you can see it on the
Hold it in
computer.
front of you, Sherrie, is how I get pictures to show.
There he is, Ethan Almighty.
Ethan Almighty. That was the first movie poster that came out. How, and the first, as we first started coming out, that kind of tagline was going to be on there, how one random act of kindness changed the world. Because quite literally, it started because when I started his social media, I would get cards and letters and emails from people all over the world telling me how Ethan's story had positively impacted their life and got them through something that was very traumatic for them. And a couple of those things we were able to incorporate into the movie, but I would only be able to read 4 or 5 of them at a time because they were so emotional, you know.
Oh yeah.
It was very difficult, but for this movie to be made is it's a blessing. And on top of that, years ago we started a 501c3 nonprofit called Ethan Almighty's Blessings. And what we wanted to do, the reason I started was because I saw so many animals that were either having to be surrendered or euthanized for financial reasons. And that just broke my heart, because I know, you would do anything for your animal. And if you had to let him go because you just didn't have money, that'd just be devastating. So we started Ethan Almighty's Blessings. We raised money. We paid vet bills for people that can't afford it. Over the last couple of years, we've been able to work with local Louisville Metro government. And the last Sunday of every month, we provide free spay and neuter for the community. And then we try to do as much advocacy and make things better for cats and dogs in Kentucky as we can.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
How can they find you, Jeff and Ethan?
You can find us on social media, Ethan Almighty, Instagram.
I got it here on Instagram, Ethan Almighty.
Yeah. And ethanalmighty.com is the website. And we're always just, we're in we are in a consultative fundraising. We're just small. We were able to help out. We have spayed and neutered over the last 2 years, getting close to 500 cats and dogs.
Wow. And
we've helped almost 250 animals individually when people just reach out to me on their own and say, can you help with this? I've run into this situation. And so we're very proud of that. I love that part of it, is being able to help people. And as you said earlier, there's so many animals that this happens to. And so what I tell folks as we go around is, Ethan's name because he lived. There are 1,000 Ethans just in the state of Kentucky every year that don't make it. And now our job is to give those cats and dogs their name and their story back. So when we get information from people around the state about this happened, can you help out, or this, and they're not charging it right, I try to get as many facts as I possibly can. But one of the most important ones is, what is the animal's name? Let's give them their story back.
Wow. I tell you, it's just an unbelievable story. And we got to help these animals because they're being abused. And you're starting this, and you feel that the movement will go nationwide because of what you're doing?
I hope so. We're doing our spay and neuter situation here locally, but we've helped animals across the country. And, whatever we can do to help cats and dogs in the rest of the country, whether it's helping to pass some better laws, or, for abuse or probation or whatever it is, you feel like it, like folks that just love you just feel like it's a common sense thing. But then when you get into like the nuts and bolts of it, there's so many different things coming at you, about trying to get things passed and how it's going to affect this and how it's going to affect that. And, we just want to help animals. Like, if you're going to mistreat an animal, why do you even have it? Why do you even have that cat or dog? And if that's not going to be the case, if we can identify you early enough, I've even talked to some retired judges who said to me, those people that do some of those horrific things, those evil things to cats and dogs, I don't think you can rehabilitate those people. I don't think they're going to change. But if I can put them in jail for 3 or 4 years, that's 3 or 4 years they're not hurting another animal, or they're not hurting a kid, or they're not hurting their spouse. Because when they get out, they're going to do something. They're going to break this probation. They're going to do something again. We've run into so many cases where those people were convicted or something, or given probation or diversion, and 6 months later they're back in jail because they've hurt a person instead of an animal.
Well, Well, it's definite importance to make the laws even tighter on this. And we really appreciate you coming by. Best place again, people can find information.
EthanAlmighty.com or social media, Ethan Almighty. And thank you guys for reaching out and cover it, because it takes places like this to get the word out and to let people know how they can help and what they can do and what's going on.
100%.
Well,
Thank you,
you
Jeff.
got 3 animal lovers here.
Yes.
Big
definitely.
big time, Jeff.
Definitely. So go to storehousemediagroup.com for all things publishing and ghostwriting and media, and go to jenniferclarkeeskew.com to purchase her book. Appreciate it, guys. That was the special Trimulcast, the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and Criminally Good with Sherrie and Jen. Take care.